Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about resistance band troubleshooting. I'm going to show you how to select the correct band, how to maintain your bands for long life, and when to replace your bands. How do we choose the right band for a given exercise? So we're going to be talking specifically about these loop style bands. We sell 41-inch and 13-inch mini bands, but the concepts are the same. There are basically kind of two ways to set this band up and stretch it to get it to output force. The first method is the full length method. So we're going to be taking this band across its full length and then stretching it. So basically, like if I'm doing a lateral raise, this is a full length stretch. I go from here and I stretch it. That's full length along its entire length. The second method is to use the doubled over or folded in half method, which basically folds this band in half. We will be anchoring it in the middle, and then we're going to be pulling on each end of the band. So like this is the doubled over method. And the reason for these two methods is that the first method is going to be able to give you a long range of motion, but it's going to output the lowest amount of resistance. And then with the doubled over method, it's basically going to double the force output and give you a shorter range of motion. So for the full length stretch version, think of exercises like an overhead press, a squat, like a front squat, or like a band over your shoulder squat. And then for the doubled over method, think of exercises like deadlifts, bent over rows, or a bench press, where you're basically wrapping the band around something and grabbing both ends of it. So with those two methods in mind, how do we pick the right band to set the resistance level to where we need it to be with a given exercise? So with Clench, we sell numerous different resistance levels for the 41-inch bands and as well as the 13-inch mini bands. The big thing is the driver between what makes them more resistance or less resistance is mostly due to the width of the band. Almost all of them are the same thickness, but as we go up in resistance, the bands get larger and larger across the width of the band. And we publish a range of resistance for each band. Obviously, because with the resistance band, the further you stretch the band, the more resistance that it outputs. So it's not going to be a constant resistance throughout the range of motion. And when you put in the two methods, the full length stretch versus the doubled over stretch, those are going to be two different resistance curves or profiles as well. So what we try to do is keep it simple, and we publish two resistance levels with each band. The first number is the maximum resistance when we stretch the band in the full length configuration to 2 times its length. So this is a 41-inch band. Basically, that first number is we stretch the band to 2 times, which is an 82-inch total length from end to end, and then that is the resistance level that the band will put out at that level. And then for the second number in the range, which is always going to be higher than the first number, it's the same concept. But now we're looking at the doubled over setup or configuration of the band, and then we publish the resistance level at 2 times its relaxed length. So when I double this thing over, it goes from 41 inches long to basically 20 inches now, and then we stretch it to 40 inches, and basically that is where we publish the number. So that's how you can kind of govern what to expect for resistances out of the certain bands that we sell. Just getting started, this can feel probably like an information overload or still confusing. My recommendation is to use the weight ranges that we publish on our website as a guide to get you into the ballpark, and then make sure that you have a few different resistance levels. That's why we sell bands in sets, so that you can set the exercises up and get a feel for how much resistance you're going to have, because everybody is going to have slightly different resistance levels based on how far they're going to stretch the bands. So that's my recommendation. Next up is maintaining your bands. So there's a few different things that we see time and time again that are the leading causes of band failure. The first is improper anchoring. So what you want to do is make sure you're anchoring your bands on the smoothest and roundest possible surfaces. So like this tube, for example, is a great place to anchor your band. I could just wrap my band around here. It's nice and contoured, and when I start to stretch this thing, it's gonna be able to go in and out, and it's not going to damage the band. You can even do the slip knot style. Same thing here. That is a good place to anchor your bands. A place that would not be good to anchor your bands is something sharp or with a tight radius, sharp edges, or flat like this. When I go to wrap a band around here, it's basically gonna cut, and I start stretching it, it's gonna cut into that band, and it's going to wear it out over time. That is why we created the Clench anchor strap. So you can basically loop this anchor strap around sharp edges, and then use the nice smooth tube on it to anchor your bands to. Another thing is, like, we've seen people trying to anchor to chain link fences and like tight wiry things like that. It's the same concept here. We do not want to be anchoring to sharp edges with small radiuses. The next biggest cause for band failure is overstretching the bands. And what we recommend is do not stretch the bands more than 2 times their relaxed length. So if you're in the full length, you can go from a 41-inch length to 82 inches, and that would be 2 times its relaxed length. If you're if you're doubled over or folded in half, this is about 20 inches. So then you could go out to 40 inches of stretch and still be in that safe realm. The place where this gets confusing and where overstretching occurs the most is when you are using the band in a configuration that will basically shorten the active length of the band. So for instance, if I get into a deadlift, I would lay this band out and I would stand on it in a deadlift. Now, all this band between my feet, that's no longer active length of the band. The only active length that's being stretched is from here down to the edge of my shoe, which is now, a third of that 41-inch length. So I only have, maybe 12 inches of length here to work with. And so that means I could only stretch this to 24 inches before I get to that point of overstretching. And it's creating a pressure point here on the outside of my foot where that overstretching is going to occur on the band. So just be mindful of the active length or the actual band length that's being stretched. So the last thing that can cause premature failure of your bands is exposure to environmental conditions. So these are natural latex. They will degrade when you leave them out in the elements. So what we'd like to say is keep them stored indoors, away from direct sunlight. Sunlight is what can cause this oxidation on the band where they start to discolor and things like that. When we ship the bands, they have a protective coating of a silicone-based lubricant that kind of protects the band from oxidization. You can put a silicone-based lubricant on these if you want. Stay away from anything that's oil-based. Oil-based lubricants will cause these to degrade faster. And then also the other big thing is temperature exposure. We typically recommend keep them above freezing and below 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and you should be just fine. Last but not least, how to know when it's time to replace your band. So I got a few different bands here, and let's just kind of walk through them. So this first band, this is something that's been in our band gym for a few years. You can see there's a decent amount of oxidization here where that discoloration happens on the surface. We have not been putting silicone lubricant on it. We've just been letting this thing hang, and it's out in kind of a warehouse type atmosphere. And the discoloration does not really affect the performance of the band, but it just doesn't look the greatest. So if you want to avoid that, that's where that silicone lubricant would come in. If you apply silicone lubricant periodically, that should keep that oxidation from happening. Next up, I have this red band here. Same thing, this is probably a few years old, been hanging in the Clench band gym for a while, and it's got a little bit of oxidization, but it also has some signs of kind of that everyday usage. And you can see there's little nicks and cuts and cracks kind of in the edges of the band. I'm not super concerned by these at all, especially because when I stretch it, they're not really getting bigger or anything like that. What I would recommend is keeping an eye on these things. And if these cracks and tears start to get larger, that's when I would replace the bands. Thirdly, I have a band with some pretty good sharp edge damage. This is one of our test bands where we basically just put it onto a sharp edge and cycled it 100,000 times. This is where that sharp edge was, and you can see basically it's peeling up the layers and digging into the band. Obviously the band is still in decent shape when I stretch it, which is why we prefer the layered construction of our bands. You can kind of kill some of these layers and the band still lives. If I was a normal consumer, if something like this happened, I would probably replace the band. And finally, something with a little bit more extreme, but I want to show you kind of what it looks like. This is a band that's literally been left outside for like 2 years. And what you see, it's like crispy. It's starting to dry out, and like as I stretch it, you can see it's like scaly. It looks like reptile skin, kind of just like dried up and crunchy. And like if I stretch this too far, you can see it's starting to get worse and degrade. That is when this band should have been replaced a long time ago, but you'll notice like the surface, it feels kind of dry and crackly. That is what happens when you leave them exposed to the elements. So basically, if you start to see that dry, crackly crispiness, get rid of the band and replace it. One more example on when to replace your band. I have a band here with some sharp edge damage that's significant. So you can see that the sharp edge has cut into the band and it's starting to basically propagate through almost all of the layers of the band. This is what we typically see when there's been significant sharp edge damage or overstretching, or a combination of both, because obviously overstretching, if I overstretch this thing, you can see that it's starting to pull it apart and that cut is going to propagate even further. This is when we recommend like throw this band away, get rid of it and replace it, because this is on the verge of snapping and we do not want that to happen. There's my best tips for troubleshooting with bands. I hope you enjoyed what you saw today. If you did, be sure to smash that like button. Also, if you want to see more content like this or anything related to training, whether it's exercises, workouts, please check out the on-screen video links. We have tons of content on this channel just like this. Also, if you need any of the bands or accessories shown today, head over to clenchfitness.com. We will hook you up, and thank you for watching.